this week, actually today, when it came out as the time of recording, about the Polygon DAO being announced. And there are a lot of details which are already out, but still a lot of open questions, right? We see, for example, the idea of a representative council model and like some ideas of the council. I hear some news bits here and there about maybe even allocating some funds from the DeFi for all into this Polygon DAO and allowing participation. Surprisingly, I don't see a lot of like Polygon core team members on there, but rather a lot of like projects, be it smaller projects, larger projects, infrastructure providers to be represented in this DAO. So would you like to just walk us through again the story behind the DAO and then the vision behind it, which parts are still kind of like are very clear, which parts are not yet set in stone and are to be built in the future?
Sure thing, sure thing. So essentially, this DAO is where you see, like our philosophy, right, which is the same as Ethereum's philosophy, which is the philosophy of subtraction, right? Where we now see, so now we've reached a point here at Polygon when we have, a pretty very large community. We have a large number of transactions happening. We have a large number of DApps. Especially on the DeFi side, we have huge number of DApps on our platform. And this is kind of when we ask ourselves the question, right? So what's next? So how do we continue to build our ecosystem in sort of the most fair and decentralized manner? And the answer was very clear, that we need to relinquish control of how this ecosystem is running. Like, we don't want to be that team where it's always our business team constantly like cutting deals or doing something like that. Like, this is not who we want to be. It should be, we are a public infrastructure company, and our growth should be community driven. And this is kind of what the genesis of the idea was. This is also why on that DAO you don't see like a whole bunch of Polygon people,
Yeah.
tapping away, because we don't want to control this. Like, this should be community run. And this is kind of when we contacted projects like Aave, like Sushi, and the reason, because all of these are also community run projects. Like, who better to learn from than from people who have already implemented this model and who have experienced some of the pros and cons, and could help us with their experience of how to run DAOs and decentralized communities more effectively. So this is kind of why we went with like the kind of governance model which we have right now, which is with the council model. So we wanted people on the council who have run decentralized communities, who have that experience, who have played around with different governance models and know their pros and cons. And this is kind of how we want to structure it. Again, the objective is to grow our ecosystem, and of course, this with this DAO, if I were to talk about it broadly, no specifics again, since now it is community driven, so the community will decide many aspects of it, of how it has to be run. But if I were to talk about it broadly, we definitely want this DAO to have a fund. This fund would be used to incubate more projects building on Polygon and within the ecosystem. The decisions on these projects, whether they should be funded or not, should be community driven. Of course, there would be some tiers here. Some of them would be decided by the council members. Maybe the smaller grant sizes. Some of the larger ones, let's say liquidity mining incentives, will be decided by the community at large. There will be presentations. The community will get to ask questions, and this is kind of how we want our ecosystem to, let's say, organically now sort of take on a life of its own, and then sort of start growing. And we feel that this model is the most scalable model. Like, there are a lot of people who have misgivings about whether it should be DAO run. DAOs can be slow to make decisions and things like that. But what we feel is that, like, if you set up the DAO in the right manner, and you have the right people who are aligned in the right way, from with the same philosophy, I think great things can happen. And of course, there's so many different models we can work with, like to incentivize teams to apply, to incentivize projects to be a part of this DAO. So there's several ways we are looking at this. We will be coming out with a proper model. So I don't want to jump the gun and sort of say something which may not be exactly right with respect to the details. So we will be publishing those details as well. But like, the core effort of how we think about this, like why we are doing this, is basically the theory of subtraction. Like, we want to subtract ourselves from growing our ecosystem. We no longer want it to be in our image. Like, it should be in the community's image. They should decide what should happen, and this is how public infrastructure should be run. And so that's kind of what this effort is all about. And yeah, and I hope that in the times to come, this will sort of be the beacon of how ecosystems should be grown, and how ecosystems should be run. So it's very exciting for us as well, because this is something so new for us as well, and want to see how this would grow and what would happen. and and our learnings from this would then be transferred into other businesses which we're running within our ecosystem, and maybe all of those should be run in a certain way as well. So we this is how kind of we're thinking about it. Like this is in some ways the test bed of how we will sort of organize our entire community, and we aim to be a completely decentralized project. So yeah.
Hmm. Indeed, and this has been a very clear trend for almost everybody in the Web3 space, right? Like to eventually move towards DAO or even start off as a DAO. And there are still, of course, many challenges to be overcome. And one of the core concepts is the idea of like progressive decentralization, where we can't just plop it to the community and say, okay, now
Yes.
you take over, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
in this kind of transition phase, what role will the Polygon team and you guys be playing in the, I guess, coming immediate weeks or months at just conceptual level?
Sure, sure, definitely. So conceptually speaking, I think still a large part of the heavy lifting when it comes to running our ecosystem, which is like all the communities, all the community channels, a lot of the marketing, like all of this heavy lifting is what our team will be doing. So a lot of the grunt work is something which our team will be doing,
Hmm.
as a part of supporting the ecosystem, because it's not just about funding teams. There's so much which goes into making a team successful, right? You need to connect them to investors, etc. So how do you get investor interest in the stuff? Like how do you do those kind of things? So there's several things which I think the team will still be involved in, in some aspects. I think what we want to focus on with this DAO is give the ability to the ecosystem to choose which are the next or the new concepts or the new projects which should be or could be built in the Polygon ecosystem. I think we're looking at it as a series of problems which we need to solve, right? So number one is to pick those projects and to figure out, and to build that community, right? Which
Hmm.
is, and take decisions in a decentralized manner. Then of course you have those other aspects which go into making those projects successful, which is marketing, funding, continuous consulting. As and when they have questions, you need to maybe pivot. You should have somebody to talk to. So I think starting with this, we will then begin to sort of, how do you say, build more functions into that DAO to the point where the DAO becomes like a company in itself,
Hmm.
and is able to take decisions just like any other organization. So I think it'll have to happen in a stepwise manner. I think progressive decentralization is the smart thing to do,
Hmm.
because again, like a lot of these concepts of decentralization didn't exist 18 months ago. All of this is new for everyone. Like
Hmm.
nobody really knows what how it's going to pan out, or whether it's going to be perfect or not. But it's such an amazing concept that we must try. I think this is something so unique to Web3. This is something you can only do here,
Exactly.
and right. So we must try, and you, through maybe some trial and error, we'll figure it out. But we must try, and we must take this risk. And so there's several people who said maybe you shouldn't do this. Like everything is going so well. Why? Like
Hmm.
but this is the right thing to do. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, aligned with the spirit of like subtraction
Yes.
and scaling with the community for sure.
Yes.
And so one critical piece for Web3 ecosystems, right, is to of course decentralize, but also creating the right mechanisms and incentives
Hmm.
so that they will act in the right way that the system desires, right? And so
Hmm.
I can already see some early signs of that with the Polygon DAO having, for example, the requirement that each council member champion a proposal, otherwise they'll be
Yes.
kind of like kicked off the council, right? And I
Yes.
think that's like, okay, wow, there's something that is a bit different here, but it also kind of like spawns new questions, right? So for example, how would people decide whether a proposal that's being championed is significant enough, or whether it was successful enough, or this person put in enough effort, right? These kind of things that are kind of like retroactively or community decided. Do you have some ideas on how that could
So
go
so
already?
so I think one of the ways you can think about it is just game theoretically, right? So nobody, like, see being a council member on this DAO is serious business. Like that's why what we wanted to say by that you have to champion a proposal, and if you don't do it, then maybe the council member position is not for you. So this is something which is very important, right? It's serious business, and it's a big responsibility. And the second thing is that what we felt is that if you're bringing a proposal to the entire community, which is not just your own community, it's all the other DeFi communities combined. You will bring something substantial. I mean, you're not going to just do something for the sake of it, because it's your own reputation as well. Which is comes. You use. So this is kind of why we've chosen also people who have those let's say thought leader credentials, like people who think deeply. Have demonstrated those kind of traits about ecosystem building. So what we feel is that the way we are structuring this, again, like all of this is an experiment. All of this sounds great in theory. I don't know how it's going to pan out. I'm sure there'll be some mistakes, and we'll have to do some fine tuning here and there. But the core thought process being that we do believe that by getting the right people, like by choosing the right council members, we will see the right kind of how do you say, proposals come out, and these proposals will represent in some way the will of the community, right? And of course all of them will be put to a vote, so it's not as if, bringing the proposal is just the easy part. And those proposals, which, let's say, so for example, let's say I'm a council member and Ishan is a council member, and then both of us come out with proposals which overwhelmingly the community votes for, then that adds to our personal credentials as well, of those of ecosystem builders, of sort of Web3 sort of champions. So which is why we feel that the way we have structured it, I think this potentially could provide a very good incentive, which which for people to bring out good proposals, and also building like a token for that DAO, etc. Also creates like a set of financial incentives as well, right, for teams. So for example, when teams are coming, how do you fund them, right? And how does the DAO's treasury grow so that it can fund even more projects, right? Because you don't want to create a situation where you're pumping in money, that money gets distributed, and then the onus is on you to pump in more money. Like, it has to be self-sustaining. So how do you bring those elements in? How do you design the token economics? So there's several questions we have to answer. I'm sure there will be some fine tuning required as time progresses,
Yeah.
but we're very confident that I think that the model which we have is a great starting point, and I think covers many of the pitfalls of what could potentially go wrong. Yeah.
Indeed.
So
And,
just
and
to
it's
add
about
to it, right, I think just the entire concept of DAOs is so new, right? Like Arjun mentioned. So I mean, even if we look from the outside, the biggest of DAOs that we can see, and we might think that everything is figured out, but now that even I personally am part of these bigger DAOs, I've personally seen that a lot of it is just learn and go and execute, and then unlearn and execute it better. So
yeah.
there are all these sorts, different things that I've seen also, how they operate. All of these biggest DAOs have different operational mechanisms. There's no right and wrong answer, no one size fits all solution.
Yeah.
But there are some underlying problems, right? For example, one of the biggest problems is aligning the right quality of people to the right roles. I mean, everyone wants to contribute, but how do you align incentives? How do you align the people to the value that they want to bring? These are general DAO questions, which, I think over the course of our DAOs develop, we will start to see a little more about, more thought leadership about what can be done about such issues. So yeah, I think at this point in general, I think it's just, learn and learn some more, grow, learn and learn. All that's,
Sure.
all that particular sort of a cycle currently. So that's all.
Sure. I hear you. Basically, get in the right people, and then all these details can be figured out together in an iterative and experimental way, right? And in a way, I think this also serves as a call to action for anyone out there, right? If you
Yeah.
have certain ideas to contribute, we can just go ahead and talk in a forum, and or try to run for a council member, or become a delegate for votes and exercise your rights, right? Like,
Of course.
and this the whole idea, right? Crowdsourcing all of the details and ideas of how to implement it, and then experimenting with them as part of a collective in Web3. And so now, just wrapping up, because I know we only have a few